Hi everyone, Maria with Team SP here at Keller Williams Realty. So today we're super excited to talk about what we love to do here, which is selling and buying multifamily. And today we're going to cover the 12 pros and cons to the basically investing in multifamily homes. So let's start with what's the advantages and the pros, a couple bullet points. And so we'll start with the first one, which is cash flow. Most people get into the multifamily or investment of properties to obviously be profitable and cash flow. So when you come into the multifamily world of real estate, you're typically looking at more than one unit. Therefore, you are more than likely looking at some more cash flow than you would generate in a single family home. Of course, this depends on the margins of your tenants paying their rents, which are pretty important. The actual cost of owning and maintaining a property is something you also definitely need to consider. But of course, you probably will have more cost in multifamily, but also generating more income from multiple people living in it that will cash flow a little bit more money than a single family home. Our second point, which is another advantage, would be that we have a loan simplicity. Obviously, if you have multiple single family homes, you're managing multiple mortgages, which we all know is another check or another mortgage to worry about. So when you purchase multifamily, you may purchase anywhere between 2 to 4 units, 6 units. You're only really holding still one mortgage, and it simplifies the amount of expenses that are obviously being generated monthly for you to have to pay out. Our third advantage would be the insurance simplicity. Same concept, which is having multiple properties. You're gonna have multiple policies to manage. Being that multifamily, of course, you're probably going to have a higher bill on a multi-unit building, but it does cover all the units all across, and it keeps it simple to just have one policy in place. Point number 4, which is another pro and advantage, would be risk mitigation. So when you have multi-tenants in one property and you have a vacancy, you don't suffer the cash flow consequence of having that vacancy. It doesn't feel as hard as it would in a single family home where there is no income and you're still liable for paying a loan. So having multiple tenants and having some sort of vacancy in between may not hurt you as bad as it would if it was a single family home. Point number 5 would actually be the competition of mitigation, meaning right now you have a lot of competition towards the single family residential homes, but there's less competition for the multifamily. Because it tends to be more unique situation, you see a little less competition, immediate competition in multifamily. So we believe this gives you an advantage to entering the market into a property that may be more profitable with less competition. Number 6, one of the advantages, which is our last pro advantage, is going to be the long-term value behind multifamily versus single family homes. So a single family home is typically looked upon for one, first-time home buyers or owner occupancy. So people will look at the home for what it looks like and if it's an appealing neighborhood and the condition. Multifamily is very much valued and looked at based on numbers. If it's cash flowing positive, if the numbers make sense, then this appeals to most people long term. Long term, the wealth will come, and the growth, should say, comes from multifamily because, again, we're only analyzing numbers, not condition necessarily. So that's one of the pros for long-term value in multifamily investments. So now we're going to cover a little bit of the cons and what may not be so appealing and a downside to multifamily. So the first one will be that obviously multifamily runs more expensive. Values are higher because it generates income, and perhaps based on the type of down payment you may have, this may not be as appealing. Obviously, the investment needs to be greater, and if your cash flow is going to be a little tight, it may not make sense for you at this time. So something to consider is homes being too expensive in multifamily. So a second downside to this would be management time. Obviously, there is more tenants, which in return means that there's possibilities for more things to go wrong, which will take a little bit more time to address. And typically in a multifamily building, if you have an issue with one tenant, it may reflect to multiple tenants, especially when it comes to plumbing, electrical. Once one has an issue, more than likely the second one will have an issue. So the essence of things going wrong is greater because there's more tenants, more to manage. So another downside point to multifamily would be the demand for the actual experience. We sense that a lot of first-time multifamily buyers are a little bit more hesitant to make decisions. Therefore, the multifamily experts, the ones that have had a little bit more experience, they tend to they're the competition, and they're likely to have more years of experience than you would. Therefore, that opportunity of them finding the property, finding the tenant and pricing the units correctly is kind of taken a little quickly. So another potential downside is that multifamily units also tend to be a little bit more complicated. Should you have older tenants in there that have been there for quite a while and they may be noisy, and you put in a new tenant, it may now become a nuisance to the rest of the complex. So you have to deal with a lot of these complaints. And of course, when one unit suffers, the majority will also suffer. So there could be multiple problems. Of course, if there's anything more like structural or plumbing, these may affect the values of the property as well. So inherently, having multifamily may be a greater issue should the property already be suffering from some potential issues. Another downside point would be the availability. For many reasons, it includes that the demand for multifamily tends to be lower than single family homes. Therefore, it would be more or a little bit more difficult to actually find the ideal multifamily property in the market. So that's something that's going to be a little bit more limited. So something to consider. Our last point here as a downside would probably be regulations. Regulations are important because in multifamily, you tend to have stricter laws an ordinance that prohibits you from doing many things you would not in a single family home. So make sure that you read the fine print, you read the state ordinance, and what are those pros and cons in multifamily that you need to be made aware of. So thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the 12 pros and cons of investing in multifamily, and have a great day.